Welcome, everyone, to our weekly NCAA social series dealing with COVID-19. I'm Andy Katz. Pleased to be joined, as I am every week, with Dr. Brian Hainline, the NCAA's Chief Medical Officer, Joni Comstock, the NCAA Senior Vice President of Championships, Linda Teeler, the Chair of the Division I Competition Oversight Committee, and an Executive Associate Athletic Director at the University of Florida. Joni, I want to start with you. We've heard a lot of talk, obviously, about football and men's and women's basketball being allowed on a voluntary basis to return to campus in the month of June. How close are we to other sports being allowed to get on campus in the summer and start talking about their fall competition?
Hi, Andy. Well, yeah, thanks for the question and happy to be here. We feel like, all things considered, that we are really positioned well and beginning to have everything take shape with respect to letting the student athletes get underway again. We have a staff, that's I feel very fortunate to work with. That we talk about three things all the time. It's the opportunity for student athletes to play fairly, for us to make sure that we give them a great student athlete experience, and the third piece is that health and safety. So we really feel like clearly this is a new challenge for us, but it's just taking the next steps with all of the things, whether it's the events, the communication to our spectators and fans, and all of the people connected to the events, and also listening and collaborating at a completely different level with the sport committees to make sure they have information, whether it's from Dr. Hainline and the excellent data and direction he's giving us. But our job is to provide those sport committees with really that information so they can make a decision and get us underway. But I think all things considered, again, that we're positioned to do that.
All right, so Linda, if you could pick this up, how close are we to a decision with volleyball, men's and women's soccer, field hockey, cross country, those other fall sports, in terms of allowing them to potentially get on campus sometime in the next few months?
Yeah, so actually, I think we're really close, Andy. So the NCAA Council met yesterday, and really, but for kind of running out of time, would have had the opportunity to vote on allowing voluntary work to begin with all of those other sports. And so we'll come back to that fairly quickly. But I think the sentiment is institutions have been gearing up to have their faculty, staff, students return at sort of the clip that they're comfortable with. I think the Council and Competition Oversight Committee is supportive of that, is opening things back up. Let institutions decide how they bring students back for those voluntary activities. So I think, we talked about football and men's and women's basketball yesterday, but I think the other sports decisions will be quickly following here. I think it was just a matter of kind of managing the agenda and getting through that, but those will come online fairly quickly.
So, Dr. Hainline, we know that the workouts, when they occur, are going to have to be staggered. But now, if you introduce a whole nother population of student athletes, how will that work for those athletic training facilities to try to manage, sort of short bursts of athletes coming in to work out?
Well, I think staggered is really the right word, Andy. And even when everyone comes in at once, so we're putting out a third guidance document, and it'll be out next week. And so first, it's, before you even show up on campus, we're going to be asking the student athletes to do their own self-check. And so you want to make certain that when you do come, that you're doing it in a place that makes sense, and that you've been in a safe place and you've not been highly exposed and so on. You aren't coming in with symptoms. And then the whole way that the athletic trainers and the physicians will be working with the athletes from a pre-participation point of view, those examinations are going to be set up, but it's going to be different. It's not going to be that everyone arrives at once. It's going to be by appointment, and one's going to make certain that you're really honoring social distancing or physical distancing at first. And even as the athletes are coming in for their voluntary workouts in phase one, that really doesn't mean that you're doing large group activities. So it's going to be staggered in a way of like 5 or 10 athletes that will be doing strength and conditioning at a time. They'll be observing physical distancing. The strength and conditioning coaches will be observing that. So really this first wave or this first phase of activity, it's not only to continue to help assure that there's health and safety in place, but also it's a way for the member school to test out, okay, do we have our facilities really in order, and are we able to follow our protocols? Before we even move on to a next phase, it's a way of really testing everything out to make certain that we're doing the sanitizing right and the self-hygiene right. And so that's how we imagine things starting.
Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I think, there's a lot of concern on campus about getting this right and doing things safely, and a real sense that we are really equipped to do that, where, you have student athletes that, this is what they do. They train, they prepare themselves for competition, and we'd rather them do that in our facilities where we have sanitized, we can manage the number of folks working out at a particular time, we can do the temperature checks and the screening and the testing, versus where they might be training or conditioning on their own in maybe less safe environments. So it's not necessarily always about sort of, control. It really is. We feel like these are safe, clean environments. We've worked really hard to get them there, and let's make sure our student athletes can work out and train in an environment that we feel good about.
I was just going to say, I've heard that from a number of coaches, that they want to get their athletes back on campus, not as a control aspect, but really because, every part of the country is different how they're handling this, and especially sanitation, masks, and all that. Whereas at the university level, we know that it's going to be obviously done in a correct protocol way. Go ahead, Joni.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's the other reason that we feel so confident that this is going to go well in terms of our championships that will come obviously toward the end of the fall season, and that's because we have the advantage that most all of the hosts for the championships that we work with are on our campuses. So again, by the time we get to the point that really with Linda, even after the practice season, and then they're ready for competition during the regular season, there's going to be so much information, and they're going to be very confident. And by the time we get to NCAA championships and we're taking them around to, again, our various campuses, I think things will be, again, we're going to understand pretty well how to conduct them. So, we feel confident.
And I'm going to get to that a little bit here about the championship at the back end of the fall. Dr. Hainline, the testing aspect. You've stressed this for weeks, months. How confident are you that when these athletes get to campus, the first wave and the second wave, that there will be adequate testing over the course of the summer before we even get to the fall and the rest of the student body?
Well, so I'll answer that, Andy. I just want to first go back to one thing that Linda said and amplify that point, because there's another population of student athletes, those that we may consider higher risk. They have underlying medical conditions, and we've had this discussion. Does it make sense to bring them on campus, or should they stay home? And when we do a lot of the analyses, the campus is probably the safest place for them to be, and that their home environments, it really is not as safe. So just to amplify Linda's great point and taking it one step further. So getting back to the perennial testing question, look, I'm confident that a month from now we're going to be in a much different place. So even recently, there's been an advance, and so I'm going to mention a term. It's called bulk batch testing. So we aren't there right now, but when I donate blood, my blood sample is pooled with the blood samples from 1,000 other blood donors. And one single test on those 1,000 blood donors is to test for HIV. If that test comes back negative, we know that all 1,000 people who donated blood and were tested at that pool, they're negative for HIV. That's phenomenal. But if it comes back positive, then we say, okay, well, we have to trace this positive. So should we do 4 batches of 250 or 10 batches of 100? Because we ultimately have to find who that is. Right now, with the PCR test, the diagnostic test for the viral antigen, we can only do maybe 4 or 5 tests maximally at a time. But a new technology came out recently that bumped that up to close to 50. If that can be perfected, and then we can get to bulk batch testing beyond 50 to 100 or 500, it's a game changer. So it's going to mean that our ability to do surveillance screening will be radically enhanced. And so that's one thing we have to pay close attention to. The other is that the FDA approved last week, and I may have mentioned this because it was right on the cusp, but a new viral antigen point of care test. So rather than looking for the nucleic acid particles and amplifying that, this is looking at the viral protein. And there was a new point of care test, which means that it's really like being at a doctor's office. So you go in and you think you have the flu, you take the test and you get the results in 5 or 10 minutes. So that came back and originally was 80% positive or 80% sensitive. So that means that it could potentially miss 20% of people who are infectious. But this is the first round of this new viral antigen test. And recall Dr. Birx about 3 weeks ago said, we really should try to get an antigen test. And so this is out. If that becomes perfected and we can move close to 100% sensitivity, that's a game changer too. So long-winded answer, short answer is we need to continue to ramp things up, but the way things are moving, we are all becoming more confident.
Linda, masks there's no uniform national law, policy. I mean, there's a suggestion, obviously, that masks should be worn in close contact. A lot of debate, obviously, we've had on any kind of physical activity. Very difficult, obviously, to run with a mask. We've already seen some professional sports, the German soccer league, they're not wearing them while they're playing, but the people around the perimeter are. How are you handling in the oversight committee for all these sports when different states, and schools are in different states, may have different policies for mask wearing for not just the athletes, but obviously all the people around them?
Yeah. So as it relates to the competition oversight committee and things that group really can manage and control, it will really be around the championships. So what's happening on campus as it relates to PPE and sort of the guidelines they're following, those are really sort of local, state guidelines as far as mask wearing and other precautions. I think the competition oversight committee and the NCAA really, our focus and our point of control would be around the championships and coming up with some standards, some practices there. We haven't gotten that far yet. We have a little bit of time before we have any NCAA fall championships. But I think the reliance is for institutions to follow their state, local requirements, campus requirements around how to conduct interactions safely and what the current guidance is for them.
All right, so I want to pick up on the timeline because we're seeing now a national trend. A lot of universities are putting out new academic calendars. Notre Dame went as far as to say we're going to start 2 weeks earlier. And it seems like the trend clearly nationally is to end on-campus instruction at Thanksgiving. Some may end the semester then, but others may just do finals online in December. Yet, we've had this many times before. Athletes are alone on campus quite often over holidays, especially in December, before they may go home for the Christmas break. So what are the chances that may occur on these respective schools, especially with championships? I'll start with you, Joni, and then Linda, and then Dr. Hainline on this, that those athletes post-Thanksgiving will still be on campus, still be practicing, still be competing, despite the in-person classes no longer existing for that time period.
Sure. So I'll just make a couple of comments, and I'm sure both Brian and Linda would like to also chime in here a little bit. So actually, the three of us were together yesterday discussing exactly that. And Dr. Hainline explained to the Oversight Committee that we may see this increase again with the virus around or after Thanksgiving. So with respect to the Oversight Committee and their evaluation of what might happen with the fall championships, we're in very early discussions right now of doing exactly the same thing. Andy, does it make sense for us to move up the regular season a bit and try to conclude our fall championships on or around, or even before in some cases, Thanksgiving? So we have some of them that currently, actually, we're very fortunate that they do have their schedule that will finish that time frame. We have some really key championships for us, men's, women's soccer, and women's volleyball, that in fact are in December. So, you're right. They can stay on campus by themselves, but if we put those championships in that situation that we're trying to play them into December. I guess there's a possibility, if nothing else, that we might be doing that without spectators. And if we can, and it makes sense, we'd certainly like to have a complete experience for the student athletes this fall.
Linda?
And I'll add to that. So it is an early part of this discussion. So we'll be soliciting feedback from conferences and other groups to get a sense of, because we have to strike the right balance between regular season conference competition and the value of that competition and what that means for student athletes and the NCAA championship. We saw, when we unfortunately had to cancel winter and spring championships, that was significantly impactful for those student athletes. That was a big part of their experience. They felt a loss at not being able to participate. So can we do something with these fall championships to avoid a situation where we would have similar loss for those student athletes? So we're going to collect some information, see how conferences feel about maybe compressing their regular seasons, look at the structure of the NCAA championships to see what we can do, really gather a lot of feedback, because I'm sure as we keep having these conversations every day, a little bit more. We try to make the best decision based on the information we have to date. And so can we get to a decision point that we feel good about, that both honors conference competition, NCAA championship competition, and provides a really great experience for student athletes?
Dr. Hainline, look, we know, guess what we know what we don't know, which is we don't know for sure exactly when this spike may occur. And we don't know where we'll be in terms of treatment, how close to a vaccine, all those things. So what is it about December 1st, November 30th, November 29th that, seems to be this deadline that you want to conclude by a championship before then?
Well, there's I wish we had an exact date, Andy. So it's sort of based on some modeling projections, and so one model is that, look, if we open up this country way too soon and there's a new wave of infections, well, that could hit us in August, and all of these conversations in the social series are for naught. So we hope that won't happen, right? But the other thought is that this virus is likely to remain endemic. And so it's going to be around, and until we do have a vaccine or a highly effective treatment that neutralizes it, if that's not here in 2021 or even going through the summer of 2021, it's going to spike up and down. And so one of the predicted spikes would be around when the flu season starts. So that is November, December. So no one can say with certainty that's going to happen, but certainly some of our leading infectious disease experts have said, well, that's a possible and maybe even probable scenario. So you take that information, and so that's why some schools like Notre Dame are making the decision to say, well, let's keep our student athletes protected, and then they'll go home and they'll continue to act responsibly. But, there's that question, it's easier to keep a controlled environment at a university, like a small city. If you have the surveillance set up there, then that's fine. But as soon as you really broadly open that up and people leave that community and then they come back, well, that's when uncertain things can happen. Regarding championships, regardless, I think there's going to be a paradigm set up so that those that are competing in the championships and those that are in what we call the inner bubble, so the really essential staff that have very close contact with the athletes, that we would want to be certain that there is a testing paradigm in place so that we aren't having athletes compete against each other who are contagious.
Quick sidebar, and I want to get back to the championships, but the athletes on campus, I get it for the tens of thousands student population, but once you get down to just the athletes on campus in those few weeks in December, a lot of schedules are being put forth in men's and women's basketball right now. How much should they actually plan on playing some games, in that first 2-week window before maybe going home for an extended Christmas break, and thorough cleaning can be done and then coming back in January. But schedules have to be done at least soon for at least those first 2 weeks after Thanksgiving for some of those other sports that straddle 2 semesters.
Well, that's why we have Linda and Joni to figure that out. Look, it's fluid. I'm going to leave it to Linda and Joni, but these are part of our fluid discussions, Andy, because you're absolutely right. This is what we have to figure out.
I think.
Anyone want to comment on that before I have a championship question after that? But anyone want to comment on that?
From a campus perspective, I think the message is, we need to go forward. So we need to put together those schedules. We need to plan that we're going to play those basketball games. There's gymnastics, swimming. There's a lot going on in that time period. Sports that straddle the semesters, as you said, those sports, though, typically do not observe the break that we're talking about. So they would remain on campus, or competing, but sort of in a sort of closed environment just among their team and the support staff. So I think what schools are doing right now is we're going to plan to play, and everyone understands you also need to be nimble. That may change in 2 weeks' time, and then we need to schedule in breaks. But I think everyone feels like decisions need to be made, and let's take a step forward, make those, and then just be ready to adjust if necessary.
Joni, did you want to chime in or no?
Yeah, I was just going to actually kind of share one of the things that Mark Emmert said last week, and that is that, in total, we're dealing with 500,000 student athletes. And so as much as we don't want something to happen, it's likely to just be when. So as we've all noted, we have great confidence in our campuses. We're going to work together. But I think with respect to, as Linda said, with the winter schedules, we may have the disruption for the reason I just said, that it's just simply the numbers. And so I think right now we don't want to cut those schedules even shorter, understanding that possibly some of the teams may have to take a week or two off if there is an occurrence of a virus on a campus or with a team.
So Joni, I'm curious, the championships at the conference level, I know you don't control, but I'm curious what you're hearing from conferences, because not every conference has a fall championship for a specific sport. Some conferences, I know like the West Coast Conference only has cross country for their conference in terms of fall sport championships. What are the chances that could be a recommendation or a suggestion that to shrink the schedule, that you get rid of the conference championship before to sort of speed up the process before we get to the NCAA championship?
Well, I think as we've talked with the conferences, and Linda can certainly comment about this as well, but I think the conferences have been doing a really good job, Andy, just really looking at what actually needs to happen, what's the best way for the student athletes to complete that regular season and determine a conference champion. And in some cases, in fact, they've gone to just saying, hey, it's going to be round robin regular season competition, and we're going to select our AQ. And in other cases, they've really reduced, say, instead of bringing 6 to 8 or more teams to a soccer championship, maybe they're just going to take the top 4, even top 2, play it off and call it a championship. So, lots of scheduling changes, and those conference championships are incredibly important. So we, as NCAA staff, would never suggest to them that they not conduct them, but we will be with them to help them in every way that we can to see that they take care of them the way they want for their student athletes.
And I was only suggesting that if the NCAA championship, for example, volleyball, had to move, 2 weeks earlier, then obviously something would have to give, either regular season matches or the actual championship. I'm sorry, go ahead, Linda.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And so there has to be a give there. And I think that's one of the things that the Competition Oversight Committee is really looking to get feedback from the conferences in how they would prefer to manage that. Because, every conference is going to feel differently about their regular season, conference competition, their conference championship. Some have made those moves around the conference championships as a cost saving measure. Some have done things around regular season competition, again, as it relates to cost and safety. So we're going to land on, from the Competition Oversight Committee standpoint, this is what the NCAA championship needs to look like. And the conferences are really going to have, like they do now, all the flexibility to figure out how to get to that end point where they have either identified their automatic qualifier or have set up the field so that the sport committees can pick and populate the brackets. But the conferences are going to have a huge role to play in that and determining what's best for them based on their situations or circumstances.
I want to give you both a chance to comment on this. And I know none of us on this call can control budgets at all these respective universities, and we know that they're feeling immense pressure. But obviously, we can't be naive. Sports are getting cut right now, and they're at that championship level, and it's really disheartening. If you could just speak to just the value, because I've heard it from student athletes, coaches, of what it means to compete in all these other sports that are seeing their sport, just wiped away here during this pandemic, of just the importance that you've seen at the granular level of the importance of so many of these other sports. If Joni, if you could start on that.
Yeah, I would just very quickly comment. And again, Linda's on campus and sees it every day. But, I think with the stoppage of the winter championships and then nothing in the spring, we've heard from the student athletes, and even more, they've expressed the value and that there isn't anything like, and they'll never be able to replace these 4 or 5 years that they have on campus to go to school and to have this incredibly special experience as a student athlete. And so I think that all student athletes would understand, and they respect each other. And whether it's football players understanding the importance for tennis, and tennis understanding and supporting baseball, or whatever that would be, they're all in this together, and they understand and place high value on all the sports. And so, again, we're just trying to work together to make sure that we can maintain that 500,000 who have the opportunity to play.
And I'll agree with all of that. I think it is tragic in many ways that we're seeing some sport losses. I will say, when you read those press releases or you hear from the administrators that are making those calls, none of that is done lightly. Those are all sort of end of the line, worst case scenario. There is really no other way to deal with the budget issues. But we have created this system where we're providing really great experiences for student athletes in so many different sports. Anytime there's an institution that just simply can't afford to fund that any longer, it is sad, it is tragic. Those student athletes at those institutions really lose a valuable opportunity. But there is there's a lot of cost involved, and everyone is really just trying to figure out how to slice up their particular pie and serve their student body and their institution the best that they can through student athletes or through college athletics.
All right, so I want to end on a positive note, okay? Quick around the horn, positive note. I know you can't predict the future, but your level of optimism as we are discussing this here in mid to late May about having these fall championships. We'll go around the horn. We'll start with you, Joni.
Okay, I would just say that I'm very, very hopeful, and we always find a way, and we're going to for these student athletes.
Linda?
Very optimistic.
Dr. Hainline, you get the last word.
Well, when I'm around Joni and Linda, my optimism is just sky high because they're so fantastic. But no, I mean, seriously, the way everyone's working together to get this figured out, we're all optimistic. And like Joni said, we're just going to try to figure out the way, and we think we can.
Dr. Brian Hainline, Joni Comstock, Linda Teeler, we appreciate it. As always, I've said this every week, these are incredibly educational, informational, and newsworthy here at ncaa.org. You can go to ncaa.org/COVID-19 for more information. We appreciate everyone engaging on these conversations as we tackle this pandemic at the NCAA level. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and stay safe, everyone.